Hello and welcome to another standard video. This week we're checking out a random encounter as suggested by my supporters on Patreon. The deck is built around a 6-mana sorcery from Final Fantasy, which will first shuffle our library, so there's no shenanigans. Then we mill 4 cards, putting each creature card milled this way onto the battlefield. They also gain haste, so they can immediately attack, and then at the beginning of the next end step we do have to pick those back up into our hand. And then random encounter can also be flashed back for 8 mana, so we can try it a second time if we maybe failed on the first attempt. And a lot of the creatures in this deck that enter and attack can also help us ramp, so that will make it easier to flash back the encounter if we maybe didn't quite get there on the first try. But the creatures we're hoping to mill and put in play with the encounter include some very powerful threats that can deal damage when they enter or when they attack. Looking at the Red Overlord, which deals 4 damage to any targets when it either enters or attacks. So if we can put it in play with random encounter and get an attack in, that's already 13 damage by itself. And we can maybe amplify that damage if we also hit a Terror of the Peaks, which will now deal damage to any target whenever another creature enters equal to that creature's power. So we can also combine that with the Red Overlord to just burn the opponent out. And then there's Calamity, which also plays well with the 2 aforementioned creatures, as we can make a bunch of copies of those cards that also will enter the battlefield and get to attack right away, so that can also represent a ton of damage out of nowhere. And then we've got some other cards, such as the Green Overlord, which gives us a 3-mana ramp effect by impending it, so we can get to 6 mana in the first place, but it's also pretty good to find with a random encounter, as it gets to attack right away, making multiple extra land drops with those Everywhere Land tokens, so that can also make it easier to flash back the random encounter. And then a Trumpeting Carnosaur is another exciting hit with a random encounter, as we'll get to discover 5 in addition to getting a 7/6 Trampler that can attack right away, so that can also maybe find an extra creature that will stick around. And then we also have the flexibility of discarding it to deal 3 damage to any creature or planeswalker, so that gives the deck some cheaper interaction while still keeping the deck as threat dense as possible to make our random encounters worthwhile. And then similar to the Green Overlord, we can also ramp using the Bloomvine Regent for 3 mana, essentially cultivating for 2 forests, so 1 in play, 1 in hand. And then if we random encounter it, it's still a 4/5 flying dragon that can gain us additional life back, have a few other dragons to synergize with it as well. Summon Fenrir gives us another 3 mana ramp card, can also get mountains with it besides just basic forests, and then can also maybe give us an extra counter, eventually an extra card if it does stick around, but it's still a fine card to find with the encounter, as it guarantees an extra land, a 3/2 creature that can attack, and then still a reasonable play to make afterwards. And then we can maybe play these 3 drops on turn 2 already if we start out with the Llanowar Elves. Of course, not the best hit with a random encounter, but it's still worthwhile just to give us those more explosive starts. And then the Twin Maw can deal 5 damage to a creature without flying if we use the Charring Bite Omen. And if we find it with the encounter, it's still a 5/4 flyer that gains 5 when it enters. It's another dragon to maybe gain more life with a Bloomvine Regent. And despite not having any white lands in our mana base, we can still cast the Stormbrood thanks to those Everywhere Lands from Overlord of the Hauntwoods. And then rounding out the deck, I'm also including 2 copies of Smuggler's Surprise to give the deck another angle of attack, maybe set up an ambush during the opponent's turn, and it's also a decent follow-up to random encounter, because we'll end up with more expensive creatures in hand that we otherwise need to hardcast 1 by 1. Now with Smuggler's Surprise for 6 mana total, we can cheat 2 of those creatures into play right away, and that's another excellent way to set up our Calamity plus Terror of the Peaks combo, or Calamity plus the Red Overlord, which can also represent a ton of damage, and we still have the flexibility of using this to dig for extra lands or creatures if we cast it for 3 mana, or if we have a ton of extra mana available, we could maybe find additional creatures which we can then also cheat into play, can even make our threats gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So yeah, that's pretty much the entire deck. The mana base, only 23 lands, despite having a relatively high curve. Also, so we keep the threat density as high as possible for random encounter. And of course, we do have plenty of cards that help us accelerate our mana or hit our land drops, so we don't need to overdo it on the land count, but we do get to maybe improve our draw steps with Commercial District, helping us surveil, and then a few more dual lands, including Stomping Ground, which is now back in Standard. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump in some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the draw. Our hands not particularly exciting, but we do have turn 2 removal, turn 3 removal, or ramp, so it's possibly still functional. Opponent black-white, so maybe erase the past sacrifice deck. Can't say no to another forest. Another tap land. Could be something more controlling. In which case my early creature interaction's not going to be all that necessary. Alright, random encounter's good, so we'll take the turn to impend our Overlord of the Hauntwoods. Get us a bit closer to 6 mana. Next turn don't have anything planned. Alright, opponent's just taking a more controlling stance here. With Fountain Port, can make a token. So we can expect a lot of creature removal, either at instant speed or board wipes. Alright, opponent's more of a token deck maybe, with Elspeth. So that will make a pair of soldiers. Don't feel inclined to use Carnosaur, although I can damage planeswalkers. This one only damages creatures. So I think we just hope for a good random encounter while the coast is clear. Alright, not bad. Get to finish off Elspeth with the 2 Overlord triggers. And then this goes face. Don't have to trade for a token if I don't want to. Since we'll pick these up end of turn. And then we mill 2 more random encounters, so I can kind of spam those out of the graveyard. We will have another Overlord entering. So our opponent could time it so that they cast a board wipe after I go Elves plus Overlord. They kept a fish back just in case of more haste threats. So yeah, I don't think I need to necessarily play the Llanowar Elves, since we'll have 8 mana next turn regardless. Playing the Overlord just to deal 4 to my opponent seems acceptable. And then they might feel inclined to wipe the board. Or maybe they just take out the red Overlord. If we see spot removal, then I'm fine to play the Elves out. Alright, Bitter Triumph, discarding a Seam Rip. So then I'll play the Elves out anyway. If our opponent makes a demon, we can maybe finish it off. Although, never mind, the Twin Maw doesn't deal damage to flyers, so I would need another Carnosaur to deal 3. So I'm probably better off just flashing back my random encounter and hoping for the best. Calamity. That one's pretty good too. So if I were to play Calamity, can saddle with Overlord, attack. Opponent does get to block Calamity. I get 2 Overlords, which they can chump, but they do ramp me. I think random encounter is still maybe the better option, although there is a fail rate. Right, get 2 more Overlords, so kind of the same as if we had gone for Calamity, except these can all trade for the demons, so it's a bit better. Should be fine to attack all out. And then next turn we have even more mana we can spend on flashing back. Or maybe setting up Calamity. Could maybe die to a Bloodletter, doubling their damage output. But it's going to be Cease, wow. Yeah, exiling double random encounter, that was kind of our plan here. So that's a pretty big setback, and then Beza gaining life, drawing a card and making a treasure. So opponent's fighting the good fight. Does the demon stay back? Nope, still gets in there, so possible they have more removal in hand. Or they just want to threaten lethal for next turn, which is also fair. So now what's the best I can do? Maybe Carnosaur, saddle Calamity with Carnosaur, hope to discover into some goodies. Although they're probably just going to be ramp spells, which don't answer the demon. Yeah, I guess if I hit Dragon, I can maybe get there. Terror of the Peaks would be our best hit. Smuggler's Surprise. Can still cast it with Spree. Maybe should have played land first. So I can maybe hit Terror of the Peaks. Alright, we hit both Overlord and Terror of the Peaks. Although I have to decide what to do with Calamity, because Calamity plus Terror might still be better. We get a trigger, deal 4 to my opponent. Saddle with Terror of the Peaks, go to attackers, get 2 more terrors, which all trigger themselves as well. And that's going to be game over. So they did not seem to have any removal, luckily. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. And we have a hand that needs a little bit of help off the top, but it's a good start with a Summon Fenrir. Can't always open with Llanowar Elves. Opponent on a blue-white aura deck of some sort. Yeah, I don't want to let them untap with a Scavenger, since that card can get out of hand. So we'll remove that. Summon Fenrir. And then we're getting closer to our random encounter. Glimmer to discount their enchantments. Get a mountain, since we can get those with Regent. And now Overlord for 3 mana is pretty good. Alright, Terror is a nice pickup, as I can cast it right now. And gets an extra counter. And then I'm not inclined to trade, since we might be able to draw an extra card next turn. Opponent does have the Sheltered by Ghosts, of course. Goodbye Terror, but might be able to get it back later. Still get to draw a card of Summon Fenrir, which finds the Overlord. So this has Ward 2 at the moment, so I could finish it off if I impend the Overlord. Or I could set up a Smuggler's Surprise, which puts in Overlord and Regent, and then we take out something else, maybe ambush the flyer, as opposed to going for a random encounter. Don't hate that idea. And Gremlin Tamer to go wide. So I hope they attack with the flyers. And I hope they don't have a counterspell. So far so good. And then 4 damage. What's scarier, Glimmer or Gremlin Tamer? Could also finish off the other flyer, to be honest. Yeah, let's go there. So that was a successful ambush. Terror is back, gains more life of Regent. And a Sheltered by Ghosts needs to deal with the Overlord. But now if we hit a creature with a random encounter, we still have the Terror triggers to deal damage with. Or I can summon Fenrir so I can pay the ward. Yeah, that seems better. 3 damage is enough to get our Overlord back. So yeah, Sheltered by Ghosts can sometimes have its drawbacks when it helps us re-trigger our ETB effect. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a fine hand. Turn 1 Elves, turn 2 Regents, and then we're well on our way to doing bigger and better things. Does the Elf survive? Looks like it. Opponent's on probably the green Landfall deck. Starts with Escape Tunnels, so they must have a lot of fetch lands in hand. A random encounter, not a bad pickup. And the Regent also helps us thin out the deck of lands, so we're more likely to hit something juicy with the encounter. If Tifa shows up, I'm tempted to just use Overlord right now to get rid of it before they can protect it, since that can output a lot of damage. And then we still have a good follow-up with Encounter, which also helps set up Surprise, because whatever creatures we mill, we can then surprise on the following turn. So now Llanowar Elves, opponent passes. Find Tower of the Peaks, also good with Surprise, but it's time for an Encounter. Hope not to mill too many lands. Well, we only found a Summon Fenrir, so that was pretty disappointing. At least it helps us ramp to set up a flashback Encounter. May as well attack for 3. So next turn we can try again. Probably with better odds to hit some creatures this time around. Or we can always pivot and set up a Surprise. Put in Terror, plus maybe we top deck some other expensive creature. Opponent's just slowly setting up. So maybe they don't want to commit their win conditions yet when we can maybe remove them. So yeah, we picked up the Overlord, so that's a good one. Tempted to just pass and then set up Smuggler Surprise, put in Terror and Overlord, and then we can maybe burn them out from there. As opposed to Encounter, which for all we know could be 4 lanes. So we'd rather go for the sure thing when we don't need to take the risk. Alright, opponent's still not doing anything. Can even find additional creatures. Mill another Encounter, find another Overlord. And then I think it's Terror plus an Overlord. Can just go face at this point. Because if they have a hexproof trick, I don't want to waste my damage on a Llanowar Elves. And then just casting another Overlord with Terror in play would do it. Or we can keep up Smuggler Surprise, so we've got a few fun options available. Yeah, let's just cast this. And then I can use Surprise to protect the Terror, if they were to target it somehow. And that'll do it. Alright, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. Our hand seems a little too slow and fair. Just some early removal, nothing on 3. Seems a little slow. Alright, this one's a slight improvement. So we can Stormbrood on 2, Regent Ramp on 3, and then do we prefer Carnosaur or Calamity? Probably Carnosaur, since Calamity doesn't have anything too exciting to copy, and at least Carnosaur gives us a bit more flexibility, as we can always use it as removal. Right, Deep Cavern Bat I cannot remove with a Stormbrood. We do have redundant 3-mana ramp cards, so they might just take the Carnosaur. Still goes for the Stormbrood. Alright, I get to Surveil instead. Llanowar Elves I could still keep as an efficient play I can make in 2 turns. Although, honestly, might be better off hitting extra lane drops instead. Opponent keeps up mana, so we can ramp. Can try hard casting the Overlord next turn, so I'm not in a hurry to impend it. Hope to draw a random encounter at some point, since that's also a form of card advantage. So I'm sure this one is going to get removed instantly, but that's okay. Still get an extra land out of it. And we're not under too much pressure. Now a demon wall, so this is a demon deck. Calamities, great if we have a creature in play already. So this turn, could just run it back on the Overlord of the Hauntwoods. Force them to remove it once again. That's fine. 6, 7, 8 mana. Summon Fenrir. That's maybe better. So I can play it not quite alongside Calamity. Could cast it alongside a Bloomvine to just present a blocker. And then next turn I can maybe Calamity, start copying some of my creatures. Shoot the Sheriff number 3. But now I have a Fenrir I can copy, which is still good value. And the Red Overlord's pretty good too. So I think I'm still liking Calamity here. Keep up Carnosaur. Attack. And get a few more lanes. Opponent jumps. So they likely have another answer for Calamity. But I can also now cast the Stormbrood thanks to the Everywhere lanes. Slasher, also fine target for Carnosaur. But now with a combo of Overlord plus Calamity, can likely take over. Could also get the Stormbrood back, clear the Slasher, but I'm pretty sure our opponent is dead regardless. How much mana do I have? Well, now with Terror of the Peaks it should be trivial. Play it, and then I could first attack. Get a bunch more Terrors, and then second main with triple Terror of the Peaks I can still cast Overlord to get the maximum amount of damage. But the opponent is super dead here. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. Our hand is almost great. Sadly, cannot play Elves on turn 1, since Verge only makes red initially. I think I still try it. And then turn 2 Elves can still hopefully claim territory on 3. Opponent blue-white, so it could be a more controlling deck. Hopefully they don't play Authority of the Consuls, since that makes our random encounter look a lot worse. Jeskai. And our opponent's gonna keep up what I presume to be a counter spell. Yeah, I don't really want this to get countered, but yeah, what's the alternative? Do nothing. Opponent maybe gets to consult the star charts. Yeah, if I had an extra land in hand, it wouldn't feel as bad getting this countered. Can always impend the Red Overlord, I suppose, just to make use of my mana, and hopefully that gets countered instead. Opponent's gonna Helix the Llanowar Elves. Alright, so we'll see where we end up. Surprised I didn't just main phase the Helix, so they must also have a counter in hand if that's the case. They do not. Alright, then I don't quite follow not dealing with elves sooner. So their opponent might be the 4-color control deck. Maybe they're playing black as well. It's mainly for the Mardu removal spell and for the flashback on mystical teachings. So can expect a decent amount of spot removal, but that's where random encounter isn't bad, since we get a bit of value no matter what. Alright, just Twin Maw. We did mill another encounter, which I can eventually flash back, although that might take a second. So the opponent's win condition is essentially Jeskai, Revelation, and the damage from various burn spells like Inevitable Defeat. So cannot quite flash back a random encounter. Can cast the Carnosaur, or we can just go for an Overlord. Then we get the other Overlord back, so our opponent could set up Ultima to wipe the board. But then, let's see, 5, 6, 7. If I draw an untapped land, I could still flash back Random Encounter and maybe win the game. So that could be worth it. And then I may as well attack for 1. Opponent's gonna defeat the red Overlord, so maybe there's no sweeper after all. And we're just gonna try to 1 for 1. So there's still a mana away from Jeskai Revelation. They didn't seem to have any hard counters earlier, so I think it's worth it to try a Random Encounter again, since Calamity on Overlord's unlikely to work out in the face of their many spot removal spells. Alright, still get a bunch of creatures. Get to ramp some more. And attack. Helix takes care of Summon Fenrir. Opponent's at 4, so now we just need to try and play around Jeskai Revelation the best we can. So I think that means go straight to attackers and then see what happens. Yep, there's the Revelation. Opponent back up to 8. So can still use a floating mana to use the Carnosaur. I can instead go Terror of the Peaks into Overlord. That looks a little bit better to me. Yeah, if it weren't for Revelation, we could have set up something powerful with Terror and Calamity. But that will have to wait. And I think we just go face here. Even though the Monk tokens are eventually going to be quite scary. So they can't target Terror since it'll cost them 3 life. And our opponent says, good game, awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. Our hand is functional. Get to Surveil, look for more cheap cards. Summon Fenrir seems fine. Can ramp with a Regent as well, or we can interact with a Carnosaur. Mono red is always going to be a tough matchup, but at least we're on the play, so that helps out a little bit. So depending on whether or not I draw land, I may or may not want to go for Summon Fenrir, because a 3-2 blocker is still kind of a speed bump. But I may need the extra land from the Regent. Opponent just pumps Hard Claw, we drew a land, so now I think I'm down to Summon Fenrir, or we could even just use a Carnosaur and Hard Claw to stem the bleeding. Although that does mean I'm not ramping. If I Fenrir next turn I have 5 mana, it still doesn't really let me double spell either. So maybe Carnosaur is still the play. Because if I Fenrir they can still attack, threaten to pump. If I block and they pump, we're not sad about it, but it's still a reasonable use of their resources. So I think we just do this and hope they don't have a Screaming Nemesis. Although that card's always going to be good against us. A Regent we can also cast for 5, I suppose, had I gone for Fenrir just to gain some life and make a 4-5 blocker. But we still kind of need an extra land to get to 6. So, close call. Maybe if we did have an extra land in hand already, going Fenrir into Regent into Random Encounter is the play. Now Kellen. Don't see that one in every red deck. Okay, so we'll summon Fenrir. Might get removed, but at least it will have found an extra mountain. And then tap Stomping Ground, looks good. So next turn we could try our luck with a Random Encounter. Helix goes face. Fenrir is happy to block. But our opponent's got a Burst Lightning to remove it. That's fine too. 3 mana left over for a Nova Hellkite. That's 1 damage when it enters 2 creatures, but can just attack for 4. And next turn they could run it back. Alright, so could still pivot and go for Regent, which can trade for a Nova Hellkite, although the Llanowar Elves just dies to the 1 damage, so that kind of feels bad to play. But it would gain me 3 life. Or I can random encounter, which even if they replay the Hellkite, they only have 6 damage, so it wouldn't be just dead on board. And then I can random encounter again, or we can pivot and set up the Regent. So I think that's fine. And Overlord plus Terror is not a bad hit. So we get 9 damage from these entering, 10 from the attack, and then 4 more, so this is just lethal. Just had to double check the math here. Alright, so sometimes your random encounter goes better than expected. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We have double Bloomvine to ramp into double random encounter. Yeah, this could work, although we could get run over by an aggro deck as well. Calamity, I'm gonna have to decline, sadly. Pretty far from casting it. We have other plans at 6 mana. So blue-white looks to be a control deck. Do they have a counter? They do not. So no more lines in hands, but they could have a 3 steps ahead. Still a chance it's the artifact deck, and yeah, Repurposing Bay confirms that suspicion. Okay, so this turn I can just cast the Regent, next turn we can try our luck with a random encounter. Some of these decks do run Authority of the Consuls, so that card would be pretty good against us. And yeah, they could also find it with a Battlefront. Finds Synthesizer and another Repurposing Base, still a pretty good hit. So they get a 4/4 on defense, and then Repurposing Bay can find more Synthesizers or other answers. I think we still gotta go for it here. Casting a Carnosaur doesn't seem nearly as good. And that's a pretty decent set of cards. Also get to discover with a Carnosaur, which finds another Overlord. This one's not gonna have haste, but it does stick around for next turn. And smash. I'm fine if they block the summon Fenrir. Their opponent falls to 3. And next turn we can run it back. They also need to find answers to the Bloomvine Regent. And at 23 life we should be safe, even if they can make a large army of robots. I guess with Repurposing Bay they could also get the Fire Crystal in play eventually. But I don't see them making enough artifacts for that to be lethal with the Synthesizer. But maybe they're doing the math right now. Perilous Snare, step 1. Deals with Overlord. And then they could Repurposing Bay. A Repurposing Bay to get Fire Crystal, trigger Synthesizer again. And those tokens have haste. And they would have +1 artifacts. So that would be 7, 14, 21. So they actually got incredibly close to lethal here, but luckily for us, we gained a bit of life of our Bloomvine Regent, and that saved us. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. Our hands maybe a little slow to get going without elves, but we still have a good amount of ramp, some interaction, and eventually our signature card. But our opponent does get to start with the Llanowar Elves, so we will be playing catch-up. At least Stormbrood gives us a 2-mana play. That's likely going for Bill. Still within range, luckily. Next turn, hopefully we can keep on ramping, otherwise Carnosaur can offer interaction. Alright, Mossborn's gotta go. Do not want to let that creature untap. At 4 mana we've got the Red Overlord as more removal. Chocobo's more reasonable. So now we can take a turn off with the Regent. Alright, Tifa is still pretty scary, but don't have a choice. It's a lot less scary without Bill putting additional counters on it. So first play a land, 2 cards left, and Uroboroid. That's potentially an issue. Although still within range of the Red Overlord. And yeah, that's probably the only play I have available. Although then I'm still scheduled to take at least 8. If they have a land left, this goes to 5, this goes to 4, 9, 10, 11, so then we're dead on board. But yeah, I think we're probably dead no matter what. Need them to have a spell that doesn't pump their team somehow. If I go for Regent, I can still play Fenrir afterwards. So I at least set up my mana to random encounter, and I make a blocker, but Uroboroid would make all their creatures lethal pretty much. So, yeah. That's the upside of that early Llanowar Elves, just helping the opponent double spell more consistently. So despite having answers, our opponent was still able to get the ball rolling. And a few land drops missed from us also didn't help out. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a decent hand. Double Elves to ramp out Bloomvine as well. And then a random encounter. Opponent is playing white. Hopefully they don't play Authority of the Consuls, since that card's very good against us. Looks to be black-white demons. Okay. So, summon Fenrir versus Bloomvine. This ensures an extra land in hand, which I can probably use. So then next turn we've got a few options. Might just go Elves plus Fenrir and try and hardcast Overlord. I see Ketramos, so they're going to be exiling some stuff as well. Well, for now it doesn't attack or block. So I'm still leaning Fenrir plus Elves, setting up our random encounter. They might have a way to exile the encounter once it's in the graveyard, so then I wouldn't be able to flash it back. Opponent passes with a bunch of mana up. Casting the Overlord, of course, also an option, although pretty likely to get removed. So I think the higher upside play is here. And then could still Stormbrood take out the Demon Wall. I guess we'll see what we hit. Alright, not bad. A bunch of Overlords. This can finish off the Demon Wall, perhaps. And then just attack. Or I can go face. Even though with Overlords everywhere a land, we can now maybe cast the Stormbrood as well. But yeah, the fact that we get to pick up our creatures also helps play around a board wipe. But yeah, the Red Overlord's getting removed here before it gets a chance to attack. The rest can still get in there. Opponent falls to 4. So within range of another Overlord. We do mill cards with the encounter, which maybe plays into Ketramos if they can exile my graveyard, but they're still pretty far from having it active. So they're dead on board, dead to Overlord in hand, and potentially dead to a flashback encounter. So they need multiple cheap answers, a discard spell, removal. Alright. MacLeod deals with our elves. And now Strategic Betrayal exiles everything else. 6 cards in exile, so close to an active Ketramos. They almost did it, but now Overlord's just game over. Alright, so we got to see this red-green random encounter deck in action. And yeah, if you hit it big with your encounters, it can be a lot of fun getting to win out of nowhere, but there is always, of course, a fail rate. Although usually, even if you don't hit it big, you always get a chance to flash back your random encounter and try it again a second time. Getting to mill additional copies of random encounter also gives you more fuel out of the graveyard, so it's a pretty decent deck all around, but I still don't expect it to be one of the top contenders, since there is still a bit of randomness involved, and it's also not the most difficult deck to hate out. Just play turn 1 Authority of the Consuls, and all of a sudden your random encounters look a lot worse. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.